Relationship, featuring our 2015 keynote speaker, Volk, co-author and focus of Chasing the Rabbit, A Dad's Life, Raising a Son on the Spectrum. Dylan is joined today by his sister, Mariah, for a rarely heard discussion. In fact, Dylan's been speaking around the country since the release of his book, but not at any of the conferences he's been speaking at has there been a breakout session about the sibling relationship. We're so happy that they are here today to share the challenges and joys of life on the autism spectrum as brother and sister. Please help me welcome Mariah and Dylan.
We're good? All right, cool. All right, well, like she said, I'm Mariah. I'm Dylan's sister. Dylan's 24, I'm 21. So we're about 2.5 years apart. I'm about to turn 22, and then he'll turn 25. So we're almost 3 years apart. And yes, I hope you enjoy our presentation. So when my dad first told me he was going to write a book about Dylan, I was very excited. Lots of people over the years have told my family, you should write a book, you should write a book. And I never thought that it would be a possibility. So I was really thrilled when my dad called me up and said, what do you think about writing a book about Dylan? And we have so many crazy stories and different things that have happened to us over the years. So being able to write them all down in one succinct novel seemed only natural. So then my dad asked me, hey, do you think that I can send you audio clips, and then you'll write it down and transcribe it for me? And I thought, okay, yeah, sure, that works. So my dad would send me audio clips. He would speak into a mic and send them to me over his email, and I would write them down on the computer. And it took a while, because although I consider myself a pretty fast typist, I would have to rewind and listen to it over again. So it took a while. But we got the book done in less than a year, and after that, the process was pretty fast. And we came to this last year, like you said, the keynote speakers. My dad and my brother were the keynote speakers last year. So since then, the book has kind of took off. But my parents kind of kept a lot of what was going on in my life separate from me. I didn't know all the time what was going on with Dylan, and my parents protected me from a lot of that. So when I read the book and reading through it and even listening to the audio clips my dad would send me, it was pretty interesting to relive my life through a different perspective. And it was something that I had never realized before, and something that I didn't even know, was happening at the time. And so transcribing the book just gave me a whole different view of my life, and I'm very grateful for that. And my dad told me the title of the book, Chasing the Rabbit, didn't come till the end of writing the book, so we weren't sure it was going to be the title until the end. And my dad told me he describes it as Dylan is the greyhound, and the rabbit is this idea of normal. And Dylan's always trying to chase this idea of being normal and trying to aspire to be normal, but he can never fully get it. He's close, he gets on top of it, sometimes he's a little further back, but he can never fully catch on to it. So that's the idea of chasing the rabbit. So I'm going to hand it over down to my brother Dylan.
All right. I would like to talk to you all a little bit about my experience being on the spectrum and being high functioning. So I hear a lot of times, not just in the autism community, outside the community, from everybody, this popular notion that there's no such thing as normal. That everybody's different, and people love to say that there is no such thing as normal. And I am here to tell you today that having a disability on top of what would already probably be a pretty weird personality without a disability, I can tell you that there is a such thing as normal. And oftentimes, normal is a good thing to aspire to be. And I'll give you an example. Like when you're 8 years old, and you're obsessed with scoring the winning soccer goal for your soccer team, that's normal. And when you're 8 years old and obsessed with learning the different wingspans of different bird species, as you see right here, my 8-year-old self giving a presentation about very much that, the wingspans of all the different bird species. You see the feathers on the wall? Yes. Now that's not normal. And a lot of times people just love to say, you know, I'll give you an example. I was 16, okay, I was at this conference in Boston with my father, and there was this other individual there. I presume he had Asperger's. He raised his hand, and he repeated this whole notion. He was like talking about, we're all weird in our own way, and there is no normal because everybody's different. And it was obvious to me even then that this guy was just repeating some cliche that he had heard from other people, but I still had to raise my hand. I couldn't resist. And my dad swears that I used these exact words. I don't remember swearing, but for dramatic effect, I said, excuse me, that is bullshit. Yeah, everybody's different, but the difference between us and neurotypical people is they all have quirks that fall within the range of what society considers normal. And we don't. We fall outside that range. And, man, that poor guy, well, you can imagine how that guy felt. You know, it's just a little group here, and I just dropped all that knowledge on him, and he didn't have any response. And I just had to say it. I just had to get it off my chest, you know. And my dad asked me when we were walking out, he was like, where did you come up with that? And I was like, I don't know. I just thought of it. You know, I guess he was very impressed by the profound thought of a 16-year-old at the time to just come out like that. You know, I told him I probably think 100 profound thoughts like that a day. I just said that one. You know? Let's hand it back to my sister. She's going to talk about us as kids.
Yes. So, reading the book and looking back on my childhood, it was pretty clear how my family differed from the other families, from my friends' families, you know, from my cousins. But in the moment, I was completely naive to all of that. To me, Dylan was just my crazy, silly big brother, as you can see in a lot of the videos, the pictures up here. I looked up to him. I thought he was the funniest, coolest guy in the world. You know, I didn't see anything wrong with him. And just like other younger siblings, I wanted to be just like him. I look back at home videos of us now, and I'm following around him everywhere I go, trying to keep up, do whatever he say, because he was my big brother. And he would put on these shows and make me act in them and do all these ridiculous things. We have like literally hours-long footage of us putting on these ridiculous shows that literally have no plot. But when he was the performer, I was the audience, and when he was the teacher, I was the student. And when I became an older sibling, I started doing the same thing with my younger sisters. I also have 2 younger sisters, and I started doing the same thing with them. I forced my sister Lily, hey, you should be in my play with me. And we would also put on like hour-long shows that had no plot. And so in a lot of ways, you know, I learned how to be a big sibling from Dylan, and I'm really grateful for that and for the things that he did teach me. And that's all he was when I was little. All he was my big brother. And he was really, really great with my little sisters as well. There's a pretty big age gap in between them. But when my sisters were born, you know, he treated them very, very kindly. He would, you know, help change their diapers. He would hold them. He would read them stories. And, you know, I always remember my littlest sister. He's 12 years older than her. And when she was born, he called her name Serena. But he called her Baby Sabrina, and he would scream this, like, all the time, anywhere she was. Baby Sabrina! Baby Sabrina! Every time he came in the room. And she loved it, because it was her big brother, and that's all she knew. And now, him and her are actually, I think they get along more than anybody, because they share the same taste in music. But so that's all he was when we were little. You know, he was just our big brother, and he was always very kind and very sweet to us. So now I'll hand it back to him, and he can talk a little bit more about his diagnosis.
All right. So up until I was 8 years old, my parents didn't really know what was going on with me. When I was 2 is when my mom first suggested that there's something different going on with Dylan. Because I would be in the sandbox, you know, with the other 2-year-olds, and I was acting like they didn't even exist. They were doing whatever 2-year-olds do, you know, on a playground, and I was off on my own, in the corner, in my own world. And I didn't even seem to see that the other kids existed and didn't socially interact with them at all. She knew something was going on. And my dad gave what he's found out doing all this traveling about the book is a very typical response of dads. He said, "Oh, well, he's just smart. He's just really smart. He's just clearly intellectually superior than the other kids." And he may have been right, onto something a little bit, but my mom knew that there was something more than that going on. And they went from person to person, specialist to specialist from the ages of 2 to up until 8. So all my childhood, it was like the diagnosis of the month club, because every person we went to, whatever they specialized in, that was what I had. So if they specialized in OCD, that was what I had, OCD. They specialized in Tourette's, it's Tourette's. He has Tourette's. And if you don't know about Asperger's, obviously it has different aspects of a lot of those things tied in, kind of all under one umbrella. So it was very easy to take whatever you were seeing in me and then just say that it was OCD, ADHD, Tourette. But none of them really explained the whole story to my parents, and they knew that it just wasn't the whole explanation. Didn't explain my behavior, when I would have meltdowns and temper tantrums. It wasn't just like any other little kid. Like I was really a little brat, like hardcore. Like this was some stuff you've never seen. It would go on for hours, and I just didn't drop things, and it was not just a little kid being a brat. It was like something that had to be explained. So let's fast forward a little bit to my school experience, okay? Fast forward, we find out that I have Asperger's when I'm 8 years old. Okay, finally we went to somewhere where they didn't have a motivation to diagnose me a certain way. We went to this hospital where they're not gaining anything from it. So they finally told us after lots and lots of hardcore studying me, he has Asperger's. And my parents finally found the thing that fit. This explained everything. All the books that they went and bought about Asperger's, it was as if they could have replaced every word in the books with my name. So we found out what I had, and then we're in elementary school now, okay, and trying to, this is the early 2000s. There was not the awareness of Asperger's that there is now. So it's like I was kind of like a pioneer in all the schools that I went to. I was like the first person that they ever experienced that had officially diagnosed this, which is, cool to brag about, but it made it very challenging at the time. So in elementary school, I had an ed tech. I don't know if they still use that term, but it's like the woman, okay, I see lots of nods. It was like this woman that they assigned to basically be my assistant, is how I saw it. She was like my personal assistant. But I started in she was with me from 3rd grade all the way to 5th grade. And when I started getting in 4th and 5th grade, I started understanding more about how I was being perceived by my peers. I knew that everybody saw me as the kid with the much older, white-haired lady that walks around with him all day. And she was a very nice woman, but I was very self-conscious, about how I was going to be perceived with that. And that was bad enough. But then I had to take, in 5th grade, a couple classes in the SPED classroom, right, where all of the much lower functioning kids go, and I knew that my peers knew this, and I did not want anybody seeing me going in or out of that room. And so I asked at a PET meeting, with my parents there was everyone, the superintendent, the principal. I said, can you just let me wait until all the kids finish walking through the hallway to make my grand entrance or exit out of the SPED classroom? And I will just be 30 seconds late to every class. Just 30 seconds. And they could not wrap their heads around this concept. You know, they could not comprehend of somebody deliberately being 30 seconds late to every class. No. Oh no. That was not something they could swallow. And that was very, very frustrating for me. You know, my sister was in the same, you know, I don't know if they still call it this at Scarborough schools, but they call them neighborhoods, right? You know, wings, neighborhoods, different parts of the school. She was in the same neighborhood as me, so she was like hanging out where I was. And I just wanted to be perceived not any different than she was. She was, you know, a normal kid going about her normal life as I saw it, and I wanted to make sure that my peers saw me as normal too, you know, not as some kid who has all these special needs. And so they just would not swallow the concept of me deliberately being late to the classes just so that I could not have my peers seeing me walk out of a certain classroom. You know, that was so frustrating for me. And well, I hope that gives you a little insight into my early school years. We're going to get to the really juicy stuff in a minute with the middle school. And for now, let's get back to my sister for a minute.
So, in the middle years of our life, particularly in Dylan's life, things began to change. You know, he was diagnosed with Asperger's at 8, and so I started recognizing the difference between Dylan and my friend's older siblings. You know, they had older brothers, and they didn't act the same way that Dylan was acting towards me and towards their own parents. And so my parents, you know, they sat me down, and I think my sister was there too. She was really little at the time, though. They sat me down, they explained to me that in Dylan's brain, there are just wires that don't connect in the same way that the wires in our brains connect. And that's something that's really struck with me, and that's stayed with me throughout, you know, my life after that. That when I think of Dylan and when I think of other kids with special needs, I think of somebody who just doesn't have the same wires connecting. And, you know, that's really how I've been able to, you know, advance and talk to people and be able to have compassion for those because they don't understand things the way I might understand them. So in kindergarten, when I was in kindergarten, Dylan was in 2nd grade, I started doing things that, you know, were kind of a little out of the ordinary. You know, my teacher told my parents that before recess, I would go and check on Dylan in the hallways and make sure that he was all right. And that's something, you know, I didn't even realize I was doing at the time. I probably wasn't even doing it consciously. But I would just always know that, you know, I had to make sure that Dylan was okay because, you know, he needed more help than I needed. And when I was also little and friends were over, sometimes Dylan would have, you know, a temper tantrum, a meltdown, as my dad calls them. And, you know, this isn't your typical argument with a parent. This is like screaming, slamming doors that could last for hours and hours on end. You know, constant shouting between my parents and each other, between my parents and Dylan. And this could go on for, you know, I could have a friend over for 2 hours, and this argument with my brother and my parents would go on for 2 hours. But, you know, I never took my friends and brought them outside or suggested we go to their house. I just simply explained to him what my parents told me. I said, you know, my brother's brain just doesn't work the way that mine does and the way that yours does. And I just kept playing with them. And, you know, this is something that some kids might be embarrassed by, but it was something that was my normal. And so I wanted them to be comfortable at my house with my normal, and that was what it was. And so it didn't seem to stop any of them from coming over because I had plenty of friends over, you know, and they all still seemed to care about me and my family. So it kind of taught them a lesson as well as it taught me. And, you know, whenever Dylan would have a meltdown and I was with my sisters in the house, I would kind of do a similar thing, you know, except I would take my sisters, and they were usually pretty young, my sister Lily, and I would take her into another room, into the basement, and just kind of protect her and play with her while the craziness above was going on. And this was my way of sort of being an older sibling, being, you know, protective of my sister, because I didn't want her to hear, you know, the craziness of my parents or the craziness of Dylan and think that it was anything that she did wrong or anything, you know, that she could help. So I just, you know, played with her and protected her from, you know, the chaos that was happening. And I'm glad that I did that, because as I got older and, you know, I wasn't around all the time, and my parents had another girl, my sister Lily started taking care of Serena. And so when there was an argument in the house, and Dylan was there, and I eventually went off to college even, Lily would take Serena, and she would take her outside, or take her in the basement, and take her to some place where, they could just be together, and it would be quiet. And so I'm very glad that I was able to protect my sisters, from a lot of the things that was going on, like my parents protected me. And when I was 10 or 11, my mom was putting me to bed one night, and I honestly don't remember this, but it's in the book, and my mom had told me it happened. But she was putting me to bed one night, and I asked her if I would have to take care of Dylan someday. And I think she was a little bit taken aback by this question. She was like, "What? Wow, I can't believe she asked me such a deep question." But she said, "Yes, that's a possibility." And I was okay with this. I just said, okay, and went back to bed. This wasn't something that surprised me or shocked me or scared me. It was just something that I realized I probably would have to do. And now, though, Dylan is extremely successful, and he might actually be the one living in a Malibu beach house taking care of me. He's extremely successful. He's met Lance Bass. He has his own radio show. He's on Lance Bass's show all the time. Lance Bass might have a TV show that Dylan will be on. Dylan's going on a cruise with Lance Bass. So, Dylan's pretty out there. And he has almost 1,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel, 15,000 followers on Instagram, which, that's a big deal. I have 300. So, that's pretty amazing. My sister, she's a little more popular than me. But, Dylan might be taking care of me one day. But there's still, no matter how successful he becomes, his life will always be extremely complicated, And so, it's always in the back of my head that he's going to need me. And, when my parents are gone one day, even if he's, rich and able to take care of himself financially, he's still going to need some emotional support. And, I'm willing to give that as his sister. And just another example of a way in which Dylan affected my life. When I was in middle school, there was a kid in my class who had autism. And he was the type of kid who, when you saw him, it was pretty clear he had autism. He would act out, he had an ed tech with him, so it was pretty obvious. And a lot of the kids didn't talk to him, didn't really like talking to him. And I actually went out of my way to talk to him. So I would, talk to him in class, I would see him in the hallway, make my way over to him, talk to him, and eventually this caught on, and a lot of the other kids in my class started talking to him. And so Dylan not only had an effect on the way I viewed him, and I viewed, my family and myself, but it had an effect on the way I viewed other people. So, there's a lot of people who have special needs throughout my high school years as well, who my friends said I attract kids with special needs. Now, I wouldn't say I necessarily attract them, but I would say that, I go out of my way to make an effort to talk to them, more than the average person. And I attribute a lot of that to what Dylan has taught me, and, realizing that these kids might not have any friends. And so if I'm the only person to talk to him, then, I'm glad to be that person. And my sisters also, have followed in my footsteps. I know my sister Lily, she's in high school now, and she has a whole lunch table of kids who come over to her and talk to her and laugh with her, and it's like they know that we'll, understand them and be respectful towards them. And, I'm very thankful for that, because it's not only, spread to my sisters, it's spread to my friends as well. My friends see the way that I treat kids with special needs, and they've started treating them better over the years. And so I'm glad to be a positive influence, and that wouldn't have been without Dylan. So, life with Dylan was not always butterflies and rainbows. And when I was in 7th grade and Dylan was in 9th grade, we went on a trip to Europe. And we went on this 11-day trip to London and Paris, and my grandparents took us. Now, this was the longest amount of time that I had ever been with Dylan straight. So, when I was at home, if Dylan was getting agitated or angry, or they were getting in an argument, I could just go to my room, close the door, be separated from everything. But on this trip, I was sharing a room with him. So that was not a possibility. And when I would get sick of Dylan, I would just have to suck it up. And that did not go very well. I was extremely angry with him for the majority of the trip, and it was extremely exhausting. There were a lot of things that he did that annoyed me and angered me and yada, yada, yada. But now looking back at it, I can see that a lot of the things that he was doing was because of his disability. You know, he was just trying to understand and get immersed in the culture. And I'll give you an example. When we went to London, he had this book of British slang. And so he wanted to go up to people with this dictionary of British slang, and he would go up to people on the subway and open it and say, you know, something about their knickers or something. And see what they would say.
Coffee rhyming sort.
Yeah, it went really well. So,
and people would be like, no, nobody says that.
So, one time, we were on the subway, and it was like 5 o'clock at night, so it's like middle of rush hour, you know, where all these people are surrounded. It's a busy subway. And Dylan picks the guy wearing the suit, like gray hair, pissed off about life,
British.
Reading a newspaper. Yeah, he was a very British guy. So Dylan goes up to him, starts talking with him, this British slang book out, and what did the guy say to you?
He was like, piss off, you wanker! Piss off, you wanker!
So we got off of that subway very fast. Let me just say that. And then, when we went to Paris, a few days later, we were in Paris, and Dylan wanted to go see the red light district. So, all right, let's go to the red light district. So we went to the red light district. It was all right. We were sitting at a restaurant, weren't doing anything too risky. But then Dylan wants to go walk around. So he and my grandfather go off. I'm like already annoyed because I'm like, what's going to happen now? So Dylan goes off, starts walking down the street, gets his camera out, starts taking pictures of all the pornography in the windows. Yeah. And the shopkeeper saw, and that's not legal. So Dylan and my grandfather, who's like 65 years old, have to sprint down the street running away from this guy who's chasing them. Down the street trying to get the camera. So we got out of there really fast as well. So anyways, long story short, these things that happened, I didn't know at the time, but they were just his way of getting immersed in the culture. And I think he can speak a little bit to this.
Yeah, I just had a very different way of wanting to experience being in a foreign place and things that I wouldn't experience here. So, like with the red light district, this wasn't just me being a horny 14-year-old. This was me wanting to experience elements of the culture that I would not experience in the United States. So I didn't have the right way of coming off like that, and it came off as me just wanting to be difficult and be pretty much just a little punk. But I was really trying to intellectually absorb the experience of being in Europe.
Yeah, and now that I know that, I can understand that, and that's something, that I understand and I'm okay with, but at the time, I had no idea that was his motive, and so it just made me pissed off. But now, we can, we go back and we laugh about those memories, and we think they're hysterical. So regardless of how I viewed it in the moment, now we can just laugh at it, which is really great.
All right. Let's talk about, let's switch gears here for a sec, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with high school. Okay, so we talked about middle school, and now let's get into, by the time I was in high school, it was very apparent to me that I was not fitting in socially. And, in high school there's kind of a bell curve. You've got the unpopular kids on one end, and you've got the popular kids on the other end, and then most kids fall somewhere in the middle. And my issue was that I felt like I didn't fall anywhere on that bell curve, on that spectrum of high school, if you will. Even the unpopular kids had their own clique, they had their own friends that they would hang out with and, be unpopular together with. But I looked like a normal kid that would be somewhere in the middle. I would like to think closer to the popular side, whatever. I looked like my sister, like someone who would be normal and somewhere in, have their own social group. But I would just say things and do things that would eliminate me from any chances of that. So, like, I'll give you an example. Like, I started observing the kids who were popular, the guys who were getting invited to all the cool parties and dating all the fine females and hanging out with the cool kids. I started observing these guys and, like, what are they doing that I'm not doing? And to anyone struggling socially, I recommend that you do this. You can learn a lot from observing neurotypical people. But I would throw myself into social situations, like before school or whatever. Everybody's hanging out by lockers. There was this one kid who was dating a girl that was like a sophomore and he was a freshman. And I would go up to them and I would just make combo with them, like force conversation and say awkward things like, oh, so he's probably a virgin, but you're teaching him some stuff, huh? Is that how it goes? Like, really, and that kind of stuff. I would get feedback sometimes from kids. A lot of times because it's like less awkward to say something than it is to not say anything at all. That's how uncomfortable I was making it. But I'll just think in my head that they were trying to be helpful. It doesn't matter. I'm sure they were just trying to be helpful. So they would give me feedback, and I would take every word from neurotypical people that I heard as advice as the word of the gospel, It was like God speaking, and I would pay attention to every word. And you can learn a lot from neurotypical people. I'm not saying that you can't, but eventually, if you treat it like kind of a sport, you get good enough at it that you don't have to constantly look to other people for every little thing, And it can be nice sometimes to see that regular people sometimes don't really know what they're doing either. Sometimes they struggle just as much as we do, I mean, if you watch any episode of Seinfeld, every episode was them trying to figure out how to act in a social situation. Is it okay to be a re-gifter? Is it okay to do a cell phone walk and talk? Is it okay if my fiance dies from licking poisonous wedding invitations? But I would see my sisters, and I felt like they could just kind of relax and didn't have to work as hard and be as conscious of all this kind of stuff, and they could just be themselves. And I often heard sometimes as advice from people, just be yourself. Just be yourself, Just be yourself. That's all you got to do. And that was very frustrating. I promise this is the last thing I'll complain about, but that is just something that really gets on me because it's like, I feel like not everyone can just quote-unquote be themselves, whatever that means. I feel like we all really have to adjust our behavior to fit the circumstances that we're in. So whatever this idea of yourself is, I feel like everyone has to adapt and change aspects of themselves. Now, even if you don't agree with me on that very abstract notion there, you can understand how it would be very frustrating for someone on the spectrum to hear be yourself from a neurotypical person. And it's like, easy for you to say, And thankfully my sisters never tried to give me this cliche advice. And I think they were smarter than that. And my advice to anyone here is if you know someone struggling like this, or if you are someone struggling like this, and you're not getting, the friends you want, you're not getting the jobs you want, you're not getting the dates you want, and somebody says, be yourself, know that you don't have to settle for that. You can be yourself by, remaining with your values, and on the inside, your character. You can be yourself like that kind of way, but as far as everything on the outside, switching up the way you dress, the way you talk, things you say, all of the external stuff, you don't have to settle for. You can switch it up and see what works. And that's okay to do. And I think everyone does that. I think some people are just better actors than others. So let's get back to my sister. She's going to tell us a little bit about our parents. Where were they the whole time?
Yeah, so here's some pictures of us with our parents. So when things continue to get bad, one of the questions, first let's say, one of the questions that a lot of people, ask at these things is, well, how did you deal with having 3 other kids and then one really difficult kid? And, that's something I can't answer for my parents. But what I can say is that when things got bad when Dylan was, younger, one of the things my parents did was really try to make an effort consciously to spend time with each of us individually. And one of the ways that they did this was through softball. And when I was 9, I started playing travel softball. And this was one of the things that really connected my dad and I. And this is something that we were able to do together. So it was a way that they could spend time with us, with just us girls. And my sister Lily took after me. She started playing softball. And Serena did for a little while as well. And when we would go on those tournaments, despite all the craziness that was going on with Dylan, all the chaos that might be happening at home with my grandparents, or, he might be even in the hotel room, like down the street. But even if all of that was happening, my parents were focused on me, focused on the game. My dad coached me all throughout 8th grade, until 8th grade. And, those are things that I will remember for the rest of my life, because they're memories that I had with my dad. My mom was always there for me, always coached on the sidelines. And, those are really special memories that I just share with my sisters and my dad. And in exchange, my dad would do the same thing with Dylan. So he would take Dylan on these fishing trips up to Moosehead Lake. He would take Dylan skiing, and he would give this as a gift to my mom even, because if he would take Dylan skiing for a day, that was a whole day that she was without Dylan. And so that was a day in which she could just spend with me and my sisters. And so we would, get our nails done or go to a movie, or I remember we used to take a trip to Boston every year. And so these are memories that we have. And so, if that's the case in your house, I just encourage you to actively try to spend time with each of your children. And, that's hard to say, and it's hard to, I'm sure that you're very busy lives, but, it can be done. And I don't know how my parents did it, but they did it, and they were very amazing at it. They were at every game, every concert, every musical, and even, I did musicals when I got older, and so I would have like 5 musicals in a weekend, and they would be at, 3 of them. So it was just crazy. Despite all the craziness that they had going on, all different kids and all different activities, they still were able to, be there for us. But I also think that, as a sibling to a kid with autism, you expect that your parents are going to have to spend time with that kid a little more than they're going to spend time with you. I knew Dylan's brain didn't work the way that mine did. I knew that, he was a little more difficult than I was. And so I knew that sometimes they just had to devote their time to him, and I was okay with that, and I think that's made me the person I am. I consider myself to be a really independent person, and my sisters as well would consider that. And I think that's partly because they had to focus a lot of their time on Dylan, and so it left us, to fend for ourselves for a little bit, and that's okay. It's okay for your children to fend for themselves, because it made me really independent as the person I am today, and a really strong woman. And so I'm very thankful for that. So we're going to take it back here, and Dylan's going to talk, we're going to talk a little bit more about high school. So in high school, here's a picture of Dylan graduating. So when Dylan had a rough time in high school. He bounced around to a bunch of different schools. I was in 6th grade, he was in 8th grade, we were in the same school then. Then he moved up to high school, and he actually went to a boarding school for a few years in high school. So he wasn't around the house as much, and this was weird. Just as we had to adjust to being with Dylan and learn how to, adjust his disability, we also had to learn how to be without him. And he provided a lot of entertainment in our household, so that was very strange at first. And now, he's not there a lot at all. So when he does come home, it's really nice having him home. And so when Dylan came back, he came back for his senior year of high school. And I was a sophomore at the time, so we were in high school at the same time. Now this was very interesting. I was excited though. I was excited to have him back and have him be, in the same school with me. And the best part about it was that I could get a ride to school every day. So Dylan's senior year of high school was definitely one of the most entertaining years in my family's life. If you read the book, you'll see that almost all the funny stories are from this year. Because Dylan, when he went to these boarding schools, he really advanced socially, and so when he came back for his senior year, he was extremely social, almost to a fault. But so going to high school with him, though, was an experience all on his own. And I'll give you an example of this. So we were in high school together, and Dylan decided, he used to give rides to people all the time, so he decided to create this ride or die taxi service. So he printed out about 100 of these posters, despite my dad telling him not to, and he printed them out and put them all over my high school. And if you know anything about high school, you know that you're supposed to go to the principal, get them to sign something. You can't just post things willy-nilly. No, he posted this everywhere. And there's another one, this one's not as vulgar, but there's another one of him holding out like this with the keys dangling, looking like he has a gun on him. So, just not the most appropriate thing.
But very smart business entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely. He made a lot of money. Let's just say that.
You got that cash flow, I got you where you need to go.
Yeah, like Sean Kingston.
Like Sean Kingston, he'll take you there.
Yes, he did.
If anyone gets that, they get a free book.
Yeah. So, he was very smart. And, to be honest, he did get a lot of rides out of that. People did see that. And after that, he was the talk of the town in my high school. People, up until senior year, people were still telling me about it. Oh, you're the girl whose brother posted all those pictures. Yeah, that's me. That's me. And, one kid asked me, isn't this embarrassing for you? This is a pretty ridiculous thing to do. And I was just I'm used to it by now, buddy. This is not anything I haven't seen before. I just think it's hilarious. So, I really got to be fazed by nothing. I was very not easily embarrassed. And another thing Dylan did, he really liked to push the boundaries in high school. So one of the things that he loved to do was to try to hook me up with all of his guy friends, no matter who they were or what they are. So, you think of the typical older brother as the protective, intimidating type. This was not Dylan, at all. He would actively try to, have me date all of these friends that he had. And these guys were not my type. And he knew that they were not my type. And I knew that he knew that they were not my type. So the only person who didn't know was the guy. So, I'd be sitting in the other room and, why don't you explain that?
Yeah, I would be on my way to the house, and I would be like, hey, my sister's probably home. She's pretty cute, huh? And then he would be like, yeah, dude, now that you said something, yeah, your sister's pretty fine. And I'd be like, well, hey, you should talk to her. This is what she's into. This is what she likes. This is what you should say. And, really? Yeah, you should go for it. I'm going to set y'all up, and I'm going to go in the other room and let you holler at her right quick. So we would come in the house, one time she's in the kitchen, okay, and then I'll come in and say something like, so, Ja'Cory here plays in a Christian rock band. Mariah, you sing in a Christian band at church, don't you? Yeah, you guys, okay. And then I would walk in the other room, and I would be listening, just trying not to laugh out loud. And I would hear my sister, I don't know how funny she thought it was in the moment, but I think it didn't take too long for her to find the comedic value of this. So the guy would be there, and he'd be like, hey, what's up? Yeah, and she would be like, what's up?
Really doesn't it's funny.
It is. And I would just get to listen to this awkward conversation, and the guy was trying to holler at my sister, and I found it very, very, very amusing, and just loved to push push the boundaries like that, because I knew that, you know, I didn't really have to worry about her. Like she said, she's a very strong, independent woman, was back then too. I don't really have to worry.
And actually one time though, this did work. So Dylan was giving a ride home to this random kid from our high school, and he always made the guys pay for the gas. So he would go inside, get the gas. Yeah,
it wasn't discriminatory.
Yeah, he didn't discriminate based on gender. So, you know, he'd go to the gas station, make the guy give him way more than he needed. And so while he was in the gas station, I was still in the car because he was my ride home. He told this guy, he was like, oh, you should write down your number and give it to my sister. So the guy did. He wrote down his number, gave it to me right as he left, when he left to his house. And I actually texted him, and we dated for 2 months. So Dylan did give me one boyfriend. So, yeah. So another thing that we did in high school was this youth group. So we had this youth group, and it had a Bible study once a week. So during this Bible study, you know, we would talk about God. There was a leader and a bunch of kids, you know, and it was at everybody's house. It was at one person's house each week, so it switched off. And so Dylan thought it was really great to bring people, you know, which is a good idea. You're supposed to bring people, you know, friends. But he would bring, you know, the non-going church type. And he'd tell them that they were going to a party. So he'd be like, yo, we're gonna go to this really cool party. It's at this guy's house. You know, there's gonna be a lot of people there. And he wasn't lying. It was the truth. So then they'd show up and, you know, walk upstairs and be, you know, with all these people. There'd be Bibles everywhere. And so then the people would just have to sit there and suck it up for the next hour and a half.
I wasn't lying, you know.
It was a great evangelist.
It's all about, the art of the sale is all about what you leave out, right? So it was a little get together. It was at this kid's house, you know. Only difference is there was a guy in there in his 30s who was talking to us about God. That was the only difference.
Yeah, it's fine. So anyways, during high school we made a lot of really funny memories, a lot of great experiences, and that's all in the book. And when he graduated, it was really amazing, and I'm really glad that I got to finish out my senior year, his senior year with him. It was really nice. And, you know, during that year we just hung out a lot more than we ever did, and it's something I really cherish. And so another question that we get a lot is, how do you guys bond? How do you guys connect with each other? And this is a tough question, and Dylan and I are very different people. You know, we like different music, we do different things, we live in different states, we have different friends, and that's just always been the way it is. We're very different from each other. But the one way in which we're similar is our humor. And that's something that we've always got along with, and that's something we can always go back to no matter, you know, where we are in our lives. And so these are just a bunch of things, most of them are, you know, movies and TV shows that we connect with and that we, you know, spend time together doing. So we can quote pretty much every single episode from The Office. Saved by the Bell, there's this one skit that we just go over and over again. Stella was this show on Comedy Central that literally aired for 2 seasons and then cut off because it was the worst show in history. But we loved it. We thought it was great. So, you know, all of these different things are ways in which we connect with each other. And, you know, it's okay for your children if the one way that they connect is through the TV, you know. And a lot of people say, you know, well, TV is not a good thing to connect with. But if that's the only thing that your kids have in common, then maybe that's something you should encourage, you know. And The Office and, you know, Modern Family now a little more, and Stella, you know, those are things that Dylan and I spend time doing. And even now, like, I can say a quote and we can banter back and forth for like a half an hour about these things. And so, you know, if I would just encourage you, if you have kids, you know, trying to relate to each other, that, you know, just encourage them to find that one thing. You know, I firmly believe that everybody has at least one thing in common with each other. So no matter who you are, you know, you can always find one thing to have in common with somebody else. So I'm sure that your kids have things in common with their sibling, and they can find those things. And So I just really encourage you to, search them, even if it's something unconventional and not super, necessarily healthy, like watching TV. That can be a good way for your kids to bond.
A legitimate bonding tool.
Yeah. Yeah. And so kind of to wrap up a little bit, and then we can open with some questions. I'll talk a little bit about who I am today and kind of how Dylan has shaped that. So when I was 16, this is actually first, we saw Daryl.
Yeah, Daryl.
Craig
from the
Robinson
office.
from the, Daryl from The Office. So we saw him the other day, and this kind of just revamps like everything that,
Yeah, that goes along with everything we just said.
Yeah, all the bonding.
Just take it.
So when I was 16, I became the worship leader at the church that we attended at the time. And through that experience, I got the opportunity to go to Long Creek Detention Center, which is right in South Portland here. And after the first time I went there, I knew I had found my passion. These were kids who were in lockup and were in a terrifying situation. But I left in that spot realizing, like, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I attribute a lot of that, and pretty much everything, in fact, to Dylan and growing up with him. He taught me, he's had some trouble with the law along the way, and he's taught me that, not everybody is defined by the choices that they make. And, a lot of people who commit crimes, they might be doing it because they don't even understand. And that's the way it was with Dylan, and that's the way it could be with a lot of these kids. Maybe they did understand, but maybe they had trauma along the way, or maybe they were abused or forgotten. And so it really made me realize that, and make that my goal in life is to help these kids, to reach out to the outcasts, to help the downtrodden, and that's something that I've done for my last 4 years in college. I've really developed a deep compassion because of Dylan, and because of Dylan, I've pursued a degree in social work. Because of him, I got involved with prison ministry at my school and became the president of it. And because of him, that I'm now going to law school, and I'm going to defend juveniles whose lives are not defined by the choices that they've made.
Or by the amount of mum shots.
And these are just a few pictures of the ways in which I've ministered to people, and I really feel that everything about that has to do with Dylan, and the entire person that I am is because of him, and I would not be here the same way if it wasn't for growing up with him. And I feel like a lot of your children can say the similar thing. The siblings that they have around you define who you are and help make you who you are. And Dylan's definitely done that for me. So my college essay to undergrad, which was 4 years ago, I'm graduating this year, so that's crazy, but describes what I'm trying to convey perfectly. And so in closing, I'm just going to read it, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. But because of Dylan, I look at people with a new light, understanding that despite the image they portray, in reality they can just be working to keep their head above the water. I try to accept people for who they are, forgive people for the past, and keep my anger under control. Love is patient and kind. Dylan has taught me to be gentle with other kids and try to understand them instead of dismissing them under a certain stereotype. Love does not count up the wrongs that have been done. Dylan has taught me how to forgive and forget, to look at a person for who they are now compared to who they were before. Love always endures. No matter how much he has annoyed me, I miss him when he's gone. Despite all the arguments and hateful words between us, he will always be important to me, a priority in my life. Dylan has taught me how to deal with kids like him who need a second chance, a third, and a fourth. He has taught me to be patient, kind, forgiving. But most importantly, he has taught me how to love. So now we'll just do a little plug real quick. So this is Dylan's YouTube channel. So Dial Comedy, and that's DIELAWN. Yeah. And so, like I said before, Dylan's extremely successful now, and I can't even believe how far he's come. It's truly amazing. And so if you want to subscribe to his channel, he's almost at 1,000 followers, which is really amazing, and he has a ton of videos that are just hilarious. Like, I literally watch them and I have to pause them because I can't get through them without laughing. My favorite one is probably the I'm not gay one. Because Dylan here, he's not gay. Don't get him wrong. He's not gay. But he definitely does have a lot of interests that might associate with homosexuals. For example, Lady Gaga is like his favorite artist in the entire world. So that's like a typical stereotype. Anyways, long story short, he makes this video about how he's not gay, and you know all these straight guys are trying to be friends with him, are trying to get with him.
I'm trying to be friends with gay guys,
yeah.
And it's about the awkwardness that can be, you know, if you're not gay but you really want to hang out with gay guys.
Yeah,
and,
it's very fun.
Yeah, and you're telling them, you know, like, yeah, I like all this stuff, you know, I'd rather watch the E than the Super Bowl, blah blah blah, you know. But I'm not gay, but I do want to really hang out. Like, we can just, this could be a bad bromance.
So anyways, they're really, really funny, and very very well done. They look like professional videos. So I encourage you to take a look at them.
My latest video is about my attempt to date African American females. You gotta hit that one up. You gotta see what happens. Did I get them or not?
So this is Instagram, and like I said, he has like thousands and thousands more followers than I do, so that's pretty impressive. So if your kids have Instagram, it's pretty funny. You can follow him on Instagram, or if you guys have Instagram, hit him up. And he also has a radio show at 8 a.m. on Saturday mornings on WLOB in Portland here, and it's also on
you can
iTunes.
listen to it online, yeah. But it is literally on the radio. I always have to say that. You know, you say you have a radio show, people are like, oh, online? No, it's literally on the radio. It's very early in the morning, yeah, but it's on there.
Yeah, so he talks a lot about music and his interests, and he's actually getting into politics lately. So if you guys are interested in the election, you can keep up with him on Riding with Nylon. So, and this is just a verse that we really feel encapsulates Dylan's future. So it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And this is one thing, you know, that's really struck me, and it really struck my parents as well, as something that we really value, and our faith is something that we really hold true. And even with Dylan, you know, despite all the craziness that was going on, we knew that God had a plan for him, had a future for him, and, you know, that might be his YouTube, it might be this book, but either way, God's going to provide for him, God's going to provide for my family, and I hope God provides for you and your children, and I know he will. Yeah, so I guess we'll open it up right now with questions.
Yes, I saw you go up first.
What if you don't have a sibling to connect to?
Well, you know, I would say if you have cousins, try to connect with them. If you have, do you not have cousins?
What if they live in Indianapolis?
Oh, man, dude.
Started out with a softball.
You know, I would just try to encourage you. Like I said, I mean, there's things you can find in common with anybody that you meet. So I just try to find those things in common with people that you meet, you know, whether they be friends on the playground or like whatever they might be, and just really try to find connections with them. Like, even though, you know, you might be different in some ways than them, there are some things that I'm sure you have in common. And so just hold on to those things, and, you know, even if you bring them up frequently, you know, at least you're having a friend to talk to.
Or, you know, every Christmas, just keep asking for the same thing, and maybe eventually your parents will understand that.
Or that! Yeah.
Hey, it could happen, man. You don't look too old, you know.
What's the hardest, like, elementary, middle school, or high school? Which was the hardest for you socially to go through?
I would say middle school was the hardest, and early high school, up until, it's a long story, very interesting story that you can read about in the book, but I ended up having such a hard time my sophomore year of high school that I went to a boarding school that was like a wilderness boot camp for kids with Asperger's. It was, and so I would say from like 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, that type of, you know, that was, as I'm sure with most kids, but it was uniquely difficult for me.
Yeah.
Do you have a one-on-one during junior high?
No. That was just elementary school.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I'm a sibling with a sister with special needs, and I think it's just wonderful. I was just saying that I don't really have a lot of friends who knew what I went through or what I go through. So I think it's just really nice that you can share your story. And it's so much of what you said, I found it myself. That's why I'm a special education teacher. It's why I decided to do what I do. So just thank you for sharing it, because I think you don't always find that, and you don't always have that support.
That's all the questions?
Yes.
Do you
Wow.
have any stories from Paris?
Another story?
From Paris.
Yes. Well, I have a story. So Dylan in Paris, there's all these gypsies in Paris, and gypsies, they seem cool and all, but they really like to just go up and talk to you so they can steal your stuff. And Dylan, was oblivious to that or didn't care, and so these gypsies would come up to him and try to sell him things, and he would go up to them and be like, "Oh yeah, what do you have? Who are you?" Blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, one of them might come around and steal something out of his back pocket. So luckily that never happened, but he definitely got close.
Yes.
What do you think helped you the most to become who you are? Is it something your parents did for you, or was it the doctors, or your sisters, or?
I think it was just it was just starting to find my crowd. I started hanging out with people in high school that I would not have considered having anything in common with before, and just from maturing and realizing, that what I really offered to people was my ability to make people laugh and to be funny. And realizing my humor appealed to a certain crowd of kids, and it didn't appeal to a certain other crowd of kids. And so once I figured out kind of my demographic, I just kind of went with it. Yeah. Yes.
Did you make any good friends when you were giving them rides?
Oh yeah, a lot of them were friends, but they would just know who to call if they needed a ride somewhere. But yes, that was one of the things I liked about it, is that you're spending time with that person, and it might start out as they just calling you because they need a ride, but if they hang out with you and they have a good time, it can obviously turn into something else, and I knew that. And even though other people might not have understood that, they saw it as me being used, many people, but I understood that it could potentially, it's possible for someone to use you and like you at the same time. Or, start using you and then start liking you. It can happen.
So did you ever have to take the signs down, or did the teachers let you see something?
Oh, I did, but on
Did they hang out the
Facebook,
cars?
it was Facebook famous, and I was the original Uber.
I was
So,
going to say.
I really am owed some royalty checks. Any other questions?
I think I missed this, but how old, Mariah, were you when you found out that Dylan was autistic?
5.
All right. Well, if that,
I just want to make a statement. I really want to thank you and your family for sharing your story. It's inspiring to a lot of people, and it really will help a lot of people moving forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, we will be outside slanging the books and autographing them, so come see us.